We are now going to transition to our next panel discussion. This panel will be focusing on car commerce, the road ahead for in-vehicle payments. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and our panelists. We have John Moon joining us from Connected Travel. Welcome,
Hello.
John.
Good morning.
We have Sherry Dorfman from Here Technologies joining as well. Hi, Sherry.
Morning. Good morning.
Good morning. I have Michael Friedman joining from MasterCard. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Chris.
Avin Arumagan from Postmates. Hello, Avin.
Hi.
And Jakob Godsik from BMW joining as well. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Good to see you all. I'm going to hand this off to John, who's going to carry it forward for moderating this discussion.
Great, thanks, Chris. So what we wanted to do here is Geneva has started the in-vehicle payments special interest group, and what we wanted to do here is kick off what that special interest group would be, the topics that we'd be covering. In-vehicle payments seems to be a growing area of opportunity, and we've been hearing about it for quite some time, and we've also seen some kind of new growth in terms of the studies that are going out. Frost and Sullivan, for example, identified the opportunity as being around 17.3 billion in the US by 2025. Juniper Research has tagged that number at about 86 billion globally by 2025. So we wanted to begin to highlight what is the opportunity, how do OEMs really begin to work together with the payments industry, with the retail and merchant industry to really bring together that capability. It's going to be an opportunity which is going to require large groups and large industries to work together, which traditionally have not. And what we wanted to explore in this panel discussion is really, what are those viewpoints? What are the considerations that OEMs will need to understand? What does industry, the payments industry or retailers need to understand about how to work together? And so we wanted to start this discussion off with, really, what does it look like with OEMs right now? And I want to direct this question to two of our panelists here, Jacob and Sherry, and maybe you could give a quick introduction to yourself, and then we can dive into the question here and give a little background on what you do at your respective companies. So Jacob?
Yeah, thanks everybody. Jacob Gajcik. I'm working here in the IT at BMW Group, and my team and I are working on payment and billing solutions for mainly our digital services and our e-commerce offerings. Yeah, we have been now exploring the world of how to get the payments into the car, how to deal with all kinds of challenges that come with that with the task.
Great, and Sherry?
Hi, I'm Sherry Dorfman, and I'm a sales solution architect at Here Technologies. And what I do is I work with customers to help solve their location problems. And one of the problems that has recently come to light is the payment problem and how to solve that inside a car. And Here, being at the center of the infotainment system, is trying to help with that.
And so, Jacob, Sherry, what does it look like to handle in-vehicle payments at the OEM, and in particular BMW? And then Sherry, maybe you can highlight what that's like across other OEMs as well. What are you seeing in terms of requirements, and which groups are you working with?
Yeah, so on our side, it turned out that it's quite a multidiscipline task. First of all, we need, well, IT. They provide the IT services. They provide network infrastructure into the car, and they provide payment platforms. Then I would say the second group is, of course, marketing and business development, in order to answer questions like how to address the customer actually within the car. what kind of services and products can be offered in the car, and how is their whole journey designed. This is what they have been working here on. And of course, the third group is engineering development in the car, because if you want to set up convenient and smooth payments in the car, you need quite a lot of hardware in this car. And it's not just the head unit. You need to think of high resolution cameras, for instance, in order to do Face ID. You need sensitive microphones for voice recognition and other high key hardware that is required in order to perform all the authentication and all other tasks that come with payments. So I see those two groups, they need to work very closely together to make that a success.
And Sherry, what are you seeing? Which groups are you meeting with at OEMs that are bringing up this topic?
So we are hearing this topic from the navigation teams that we routinely work with. We are further starting to be brought into discussions with many of the same team members that Jacob just talked about. People from the IT side, people from the marketing side, people from the business development side, and a lot of people who are tied to the modem.
Got it. Sounds like a lot of meetings.
It's a lot of meetings. It's very complicated.
And Mike and Avin, if you could give quick backgrounds on yourself, and then also you represent basically the merchant and card brands. Can you give us a little bit of understanding of what you're seeing from OEMs and from your experience and the time working with them?
Mike, you want to start off?
You go, Mike.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Friedman. I'm a director with MasterCard's Digital Future Group. And we look at everything that is impacting the future of commerce and payments, and mobility and connected car fall into that. In terms of how we think about the space, or at least I think about the space, there's a really great opportunity here to involve or bring together the merchant experience, the issuer experience, and the car driving experience into one environment. And it's a very exciting opportunity. We are working with a lot of innovation teams, or we have worked with a lot of innovation teams at different OEMs, and we'll continue to support this. We definitely see some opportunities here to keep things safe, to make the experience a little more connected between the consumer and the OEM and the merchant. And it is a challenge, but we'll continue to work through it.
Great.
Cool.
And Avin, you have two perspectives, actually, right?
Yeah.
We've worked together quite some time.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is Avin Arumugam. I lead payments as well as the merchant experience here at Postmates. And as John alluded to prior to this, I started and led the Visa IoT group, which where Connected Commerce came under. So a lot of fun things that we work together in the car world. So I think, let me give my perspective. And I thought about this question, we had a surprise, we knew what some of the questions were. So I thought about this, and my best analogy for how the OEMs and payment industry work together, there's a lack of appreciation by both sides on what the other one does and what the other one is trying to do, right? And so there's a lot of education that needs to happen, as both sides need to educate each other on how things work. And the best analogy I have is, think of two athletes. One's a javelin thrower and the other one's a shot put thrower, right? They're both athletes. They both they're at the top of their level, but each one of them doesn't have an appreciation of what the other one does. They're both throwing things, but it's very, very different, right? So I think when it comes to my experience when I was at the payments at Visa working with OEMs, it was a lot of education to bring the OEMs along, and vice versa, right? The OEMs had to educate us on the payment side to understand the implications that are going on within their complex ecosystem, which is the car.
Great. Actually, so that leads us to a great next question, which is, what are some of those organizations? If we're, we have a largely OEM audience here for this discussion. What are some of those organizations that they could get involved with?
Well, from a payment, and Mike, I'll just jump in here, but from a payments perspective, right? We have the ETA, which is in essence an overarching group that talks about the Electronic Transaction Association, which is a really good group. And I think, John, you've had a couple more that you mentioned. I can't pull them off the top of my head, but it's ETA, it's FIDO for your biometrics and all the other authentication pieces, right? So those are the two things that I would highlight that the OEMs can get involved to really try to understand what's happening with payments, to kind of soak in the education of how payments are evolving. As you know, I guess we all know with the current situation with COVID, payments is taking leaps and bounds, jumps in digitization, where merchants as well as other providers had a slight hesitancy to start embracing digital payments. That is getting thrown out the window, because that's the first step right now. Hey, I can't have people coming in. How about I do this digitally? So to keep it abreast of that, I think those are some of the great sort of associations. Then you have some of the payment conferences out there. I don't know how payment conferences are going to work anymore. So I would think some conferences like Money 2020 is a rather decent place to kind of get knowledgeable about what's going on.
Yeah. Mike, how about you? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all appropriate places to start. The other thing you can do is give us a call. I'm sure if you give our competitors a call, they'd be happy to take you through it. We a lot of what we do in our group, especially around devices and these new payment concepts, is education. And there are a lot of groups in the industry. It's not just the OEMs or the suppliers or the operating systems, but it's the merchants, it's the banks, it's third-party technology providers. And there's a whole bunch of folks that need to come together and make this happen. And what we've done in the past with, say, wearable devices, cell phones, is we've been able to bring these constituents together and kind of educate everyone along the way and bring these ecosystems up and running. And I think the car is a similar ecosystem, a little more challenging because of the competitive dynamics. There's a lot more secrecy in the OEM space than there is in other industries. A lot more unwillingness to work with other parties in with competitors. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, I think this is a space where everyone is going to have to come together a little bit for it to be successsul.
Yeah,
just reach out.
And there seems to be a lot of existing standardization. Some of the other organizations that we talked about when we were preparing for this panel, the PCI Security Standards Council, EMVCO, the FIDO Alliance, Secure Technology Alliance. So Jacob, how does the OEM look at this new responsibility if taking on credit cards? I mean, in addition to cardholder and PII information, PCI compliance, the concerns with hacking, how are you viewing this kind of new reality for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is really a very crucial topic. The customer payment data, and in particular also privacy and security, needs to be considered at a very early stage when you design the process and you design the business, because it can actually determine what kind of business can be done and what kind of business cannot. You mentioned also some standards like the PCI standard, so there is quite a bit to rely on, but it's important to stick to that 100% to those standards. Those standards regulate how you actually build software. They regulate how certain kind of data can be transferred from one party to another. They regulate what is allowed in sense of keeping data at a certain system or a certain stage and what is not allowed. And there's a lot of experience already there. The thing is, I think, is also you need to know about those standards. You need to keep you up to date when you work with your with the groups that I already mentioned. And that's key. You know, always you need to know the standards, and you need to keep yourself updated. What is out there? What certification standards are there? Also, I think an important topic is that when you combine certain systems together, this is what comes out of this PCI standard. There are certain certification levels. You need to always take into consideration and make sure that all steps in between of the entire journey and all systems that are involved keep to a certain or to the appropriate level of security here, and exchange data in the way they're allowed to or they should to exchange. This includes also not all the systems you're only in-house, but also all third-party services, external services. You need to have quite a good view on what kind of different topic and services are you actually using. And of course, yeah, not also to forget tokenization. I think that's really key. How you set up actually a scenario where you exchange data. Tokenization means that we're not exchanging credit card data in the world, the playing card data, but we using encrypted tokens, and therefore, of course, something like stealing numbers or other scenarios are way less dangerous in the sense of that you can focus on which crucial system parts needs to be secured in your journey, and that makes a bit or allows you more control of the security topic. That's definitely crucial in this task here.
So, and Mike, let me throw you a little bit of a softball here. How do you guys feel about tokenization and where its place is with the connected car?
Well, my least favorite commercial on TV right now is the Apple commercial where they're revealing all sorts of private information that they think is safely stored in the phone. And I have no problem with any of the bits except for where they're yelling out the credit card number, because we've taken great lengths to make sure that these numbers, and this is across the industry, are not kept in the clear, that they are tokenized, as Jacob said, and they are as safe as the consumer is in a vehicle. We want that payment credential to be safe wherever it's held. Ivan, I don't know if you have another perspective, but that's.
Yeah, my simple perspective is when I would talk to OEMs and I would be at their board meetings, explain to them, tokenization is a simple concept, but I think the story that really hit home with OEMs, and I think this audience will be a story that I think I like to tell. So back in the 1920s, there was a bank robber by the name of Willie Sutton. And one day they asked him, "Willie, why do you rob the banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." Right? So in the same thing, when people used to ask us, why are hackers hacking merchants or all these places? I'm like, because that's where the credit card numbers are. So the networks, Visa, MasterCard, and Amex all got together, part of the Apple Pay, and now they have extended this network tokenization to all the different brands and all the different sort of providers that have the ability to get a payment credential and keep that information, right, as a network token in their system, and it'll work. So it also doesn't matter which service provider you go to. So if any OEM decides to go to one provider or another provider, as long as they accept network tokens, they're fine. And that's why that's, I think, the first step that we took to kind of solidify or codify how commerce payments should begin to work in vehicles and devices, appliances, et cetera, et cetera. So big proponent of tokenization. I think it's the necessary step for us to get on that journey to where we all believe in-vehicle payments will be the norm for people buying the cars, the future cars that you guys will be rolling out. So I think, is John still here or?
Lost him?
I think we might have lost John.
I think we've lost him.
maybe hello, John, might be a technical difficulty of timing out there.
Yeah.
Hopefully he's back here in just a second.
This never happens in a physical conference, Chris, does it?
Right, exactly. Yes, never at all. I have a question for you while waiting for John to reconnect. When you look across the automotive landscape, who do you think is doing particularly well when it comes to in-vehicle payment technology? And kind of pushing the envelope of what's possible now and in the future.
Yeah, so I'd be curious to hear from the other panelists, but I have to say that across the board, and I've worked with 7 or 8 OEMs at this point, across the board, I think there's a lot of good work that's being done in this space. I think there's an understanding around what the OEM wants to get out of the relationship with the consumers and why payment is part of that, whether it's facilitating commerce between the OEM and the consumer itself, or bringing third-party merchants into the ecosystem, say gas or tolls, or but across the board, I think there's a real willingness to learn and experiment and identify a new opportunity. So let me leave it there and see if there's any other thoughts from the other panelists.
Sure.
Great, and I am back. Sorry about that. We had Zoom decide to take a quick nap.
Welcome back, John.
Great. Actually, wanted to shift a little bit here to the user experience of in-vehicle payments, and maybe I could direct this question to Sherry. So Sherry, what are you seeing as how people want to utilize in-vehicle payments? You must have seen requirements from quite a few other OEMs. Can you share what you're seeing as some of those requirements and what some of those needs that are unique to OEMs?
So sure. So the first thing that we hear from OEMs is that whatever they do in the car has to be done safely and has to not distract the driver. And then the second thing that we keep hearing is really the experience that they are trying to have for their driver in the car. And the experience that keeps coming up over and over again is, I am going somewhere, where it be a restaurant, and I'm sure we will have the opportunity to go to restaurants again, but they're going to a restaurant or they're going somewhere, and they need to park when they get there. And you know, sometimes parking is competitive and they want to know, can I reserve and pay for my spot in advance? So when I get there, I know in particular which parking facility I'm going to, and then you still have to go somewhere at the end. And at the center of all of that is the infotainment system, which has, in most cases, a here map and here search to go search for that restaurant, and then here traffic, which will enable them to get to the restaurant at a particular time, or at least tell them how long it's going to take to get to that restaurant. So we hear consistently, it's all about that situation. I am going somewhere. And then the same thing, I'm driving to work, and do I have time to stop for coffee, or can I save a few minutes if I can order my coffee ahead and pay for my coffee and then continue on my journey? Or I have to get gas. So it's all about removing the uncertainty of the driver's experience when they're going on a route.
Great. And what do you think the merchant experience? How are you seeing merchants begin to interact or evolve? I know now you have at your new role here at Postmates. How are you beginning to see OEMs involved? I mean, you are somewhat part of transportation already, but are you beginning to look at how you can integrate more deeply?
So yes, I think that's a really good question, John. The fundamental, I guess, the challenge that we have is we're so highly focused on the 3 constituents that we serve. Right? And the 3 constituents that we serve here at Postmates are the buyer, the merchant, as well as the fleet of the driver, right? The person that's delivering the meal. So how we start to begin to think about that, we're so maniacally focused on making sure that they have the best experience possible, and how we are able to, I guess, determine or influence that in the in-dash unit is really, really important to us. That being said, I have more questions about how OEMs are going to start thinking about this, because, you know, from my, I guess, rudimentary view into the OEMs, they almost kind of got burned with some of the navigation stuff, right? They incorporated it in, and then people started using their phones, right? And so that matching of, oh, I've got a phone, so I don't need my in-dash unit, that I think is going to be a little bit of a challenge, because from a merchant's perspective, we have control of the phone, and we can make sure we have a clear merchant experience or a consumer experience or a fleet experience. How will we do that at an OEM? That's a real challenge, because remember, we're just one merchant, right? We're just one merchant. So how does that work across? And I think I'm going to give a plug to Mike and the rest of the networks. That's where the payment ecosystem needs to kind of step up and kind of help deliver that sort of interface to the organizations, to the OEMs.
It's such a great point, Avin. The comparing, say, an iPhone or an Android device to a car, where the merchant experience on the device is completely controlled by the merchant. They can build that app however they want. They can make that look and feel however they want. They can talk to the customer. They own the customer. Apple is just kind of a conveyance for that. The vehicle is very different. The infotainment center is the manufacturer's space. That's how they communicate to the consumer. And so to bring in multiple merchants into that environment, I mean, McDonald's and Burger King, Coke and Pepsi, Aldi and Tesco, you bring them in together in the same environment, they have to be differentiated. They have to have their own voice and their own connection to the customer. And the OEM wants a connection too. So it creates a little bit of friction there.
Yeah, and if we look at the direction that it's going, payments and mobile have seemed to kind of are being joined at the hip, or being fused together. Even a lot of the requirements, what we're finding, look like mobile requirements, and we'll talk about some of these kind of regional issues or regional concerns that are beginning to show up. So in looking at what's available in the infotainment system, let's kind of look at what are the experiences, what are the considerations in the use case in the car that are different from mobile? I mean, we have touch and voice and biometrics and mobile in it versus mobile and embedded ultimately. So what are the concerns that you might have? Let's field this one to Mike. What are the concerns that you might have that OEM should really consider?
Well, I think, in terms of concerns, security and authentication of the consumer is always going to be a big challenge. It was talked about a little bit before, and I think actually, Avin, I think you were speaking to it, or maybe it was, sorry, Jacob, the devices, the need for cameras or hypersensitive microphones to authenticate the consumer. And that's because in any payment transaction, the consumer is best authenticated by the bank. They're the entity that owns the relationship with the consumer with that wallet. And so we always want the bank to be able to authenticate the consumer. And to do that in a car, you need to be able to grab that information, share it with the bank, and then process the transaction. And John, I think you're going to get into that a little bit more in the fireside chat that follows. But definitely authentication is an area of, I would say, concern. The other kind of places you think about are, what does that interface look like? Is it safe? Nobody in the payments industry wants someone to go off the road because they were buying a hamburger. So we're all behind eyes on the road, hands on the wheel. And then, I think another point, and I don't know if this is a concern, but I think it's important to point out, as far as the networks go, maybe this is a Mike opinion as opposed to a MasterCard opinion, but I don't really care if you're buying that cup of coffee with a credit card in the store, or if you're buying it with a credit card in the car. To me, it's virtually the same. What I do want is for you to have the best possible experience when you buy that cup of coffee. And I want you to feel safe when you do it. And I want you to trust your bank, and I want you to trust the network. And importantly, I want you to trust the device that's enabling that. I would say the concern is more let's make sure that the customer experience here is the best it can possibly be.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would piggyback on something that Mike just said, right? There's two big pieces here that we need to kind of, and let me just kind of try to bring them together here. The first thing is that OEMs need to really understand is the entire payment industry is based on risk, right? Everything for the charge, everything is dependent on how risky something is, right? So that's the first tenet. The second tenet that I think is really important is know your customer. And that sort of friction point of who owns the customer. Does the bank own the customer, or is the driver of that car? So is that the OEM's customer, or is it the device manufacturer that they're using? Whose customer is that? So those are the two friction points, and understanding who owns the customer or who's taking on that burden to reduce the risk. That's the dance, right? That really complicated dance that we are going through right now. And this happens in every new industry as you begin to kind of forge the path through, right? You're forging the path through, everybody's a little bit weirded, don't want to step on too many toes, but at some point, somebody's gotta be able to do this backwards, right? When they're dancing. So hopefully that analogy kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Jacob, how are you addressing some of those driver safety concerns? What can you say about BMW's approach to it?
I think Sherry was mentioning driver's distraction, right? That's of course, let's say, the distinction topic here, because you can actually think two scenarios. The one scenario is where you limit your payment on a non-driving scenario in the car, which is kind of weird if you're talking about doing payments in the car, but you force the driver to, stop and doing payments just because the fact that there is some authentication, some questions to be answered or something like that, which is not allowed to do while you drive. So I think that's really a challenge, and also coming back to what you said, Mike, that needs to be done in that way that it's so smooth and so simple. The whole payment process needs to be so simple that it actually doesn't really force the driver to do something which is not allowed when you're in a driving situation. So just think of scenarios like, being at the toll station, driving through that, or I think Sherry, you was also mentioning the parking. You don't want to, make a full stop to do some kind of two-factor authentication topic with a mobile device in your hand. This is nothing you want really to do. And I would even go a little bit step further here, and exaggerating now a bit, but you could say that payments will probably be in the near future when we solve all these challenges that we're facing, but payment will be something like power supply, right? It needs to be there, it needs to work. Nothing really get noticed of that until it doesn't work or it makes problems. It is like it is. It will be a commodity, a simple process that will be in everyday's life, and it's nothing special. And we all know, OEMs know, and the providers know, and Mike, it's quite a challenge to get everything working. But for the customer, that's a super simple process, and it needs to be super simple. And I think that's the challenge here, and you need to be very careful in how you design the payments, how you design the whole business workflow within the car, because that will be really, deciding of being successful or being the conversion killer here.
Yeah, I think, Sherry, you and I had talked about adding context and being able to support that to make it simpler. Can you share a little bit more about what we talked about?
Well, that's an area where we can help make it similar by kind of unifying the experience by letting the driver then search, navigate, park, pay all in one unified experience. And that's pretty much what we had talked about.
Yeah, and we talk, that I think it's interesting that we have here on a discussion around payments, because it really is that additional context that you really know where somebody is when it's what's happening, or where someone might be going. I think that additional context is really valuable in removing some steps in the process. And I think a lot of times what we looked at in vehicle payments is really, how do we remove steps out of this, out of these processes? If we can certainly make it more seamless and safe. So I wanted to shift now to kind of regional issues, or things that we might see that are different. You know, we don't want to take a very US-centric view of these things. We want to take a look at globally. You know, how are things different around the world? Mike, can you share with us a little bit more about you know, what some of those regional differences might be?
You know, I've been thinking about this, John, and there are definitely different rules. I mean, things without getting into the weeds here, there are different rules around data privacy and authentication in say Europe that are a little bit different. But I think wherever you go, there is still this idea that there are contextually relevant experiences for consumers that can only come about from the car. And, you know, regardless if we're talking to OEMs in Germany or Korea or Japan, there's still this belief that these same experiences are something that could be delivered to consumers and delivered well to improve the value proposition of the car itself. But sorry, I've just, maybe it's my own parochial view of the world or whatever. I don't have a great answer for you in terms of what's different region to region.
Okay. Avin, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about the OEMs that are listening to this, right? What are they, the things that, there are a couple of things you need to, I would make sure that you understand. Number one, each country or region has different payment infrastructures, right? You know, the networks, Visa, MasterCard, Amex are global, but within each particular region, there are different payment infrastructures that are particular to that locality. They are sometimes not as, I guess, advanced from the technology perspective as the networks are. So you're going to have that little jump, number one, right? If you want to make sure that the experience is across the board for everybody. The second thing is a more, I guess, liberal arts sort of view on payments. Payments is anthropological. Everybody believes it's all technical and we're moving bits and bytes. But if you break it down, payments is anthropological, meaning the way that somebody's, you know, in Germany. Sorry, Jacob, I'm looking at you, right? The way that they think about money is very different from how somebody that was born in the US or Australia or UK, you know, credit is very different. So understanding your customer and understanding the region is even more important. And I think the OEMs get that down perfectly about, hey, different regions, different levels of the car. Think of that same sort of mindset and shift it to payments. When you begin thinking about different regions, will help you go a long way in determining which systems you should set up for your overarching central ecosystem of your payments infrastructure. Hope that makes sense.
And to just add a comment kind of to what Evan started with, kind of pre-COVID, when I would talk to my European colleagues about the whole concept of, can I order dinner from my car or lunch and have it delivered to my car? I thought that use case was very much something you'd hear from an American. And, you know, I'm in New York City and I want to order something to my cab, 1, 2, 3, 4, put it in my car at the corner, and, you know, I can move on. And I'm stuck in traffic and, you know, I want to order something to pick up on my way home. Now with COVID, I think that you know, my European colleagues have started to think, hey, that's not so far-fetched as it was before.
Yeah, another example of that maybe is something as simple as buying gas. So in 48 states of the United States, when you buy gas, you can pump it yourself. There are 2 states where you can't. If you go to Europe, Germany in particular, the gas buying process is very different than it looks in the United States. You've got to go in the store and pay for the gas, and so it's less about the payment infrastructure being different region to region, because I think if you look at things like Apple Pay and Samsung Pay, these have rolled out globally. But the challenge is that merchant consumer interaction, which is very cultural, to Avin's point, and very much going to change region to region.
John, if I can jump in, I've got a little bit of a growing list of questions from the audience. If I could pose a few of those your collective way.
Yeah, this is perfect timing.
All right.
Well, let me add one thing. So we will be talking about more of these regional issues, specifically Europe, in the fireside chat following the panel. And then, so what we'll do is drop panelists off and continue the discussion with Jacob and also Karsten from MasterCard.
Very good. I'll do these in a bit of an order here, but the first question is, what technologies are missing to make in-vehicle commerce more easy to develop and deploy?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think there's really 2 things. One, in the vehicle itself, we don't yet have those kind of biometric sensors to be able to do strong consumer authentication in the vehicle. We have ways to work around it. We can do some things which are a little maybe old-fashioned. There's some new age stuff or not new age, but there's some future-looking stuff with AI that we're looking at, behavioral biometrics. But we don't have those sensors in the car, and that's coming. There's a lag there, right? But that's coming. The other thing that's missing, and this is not on the vehicle side, but this is more the challenge of integrating multiple merchants into a common third-party platform. Today, the way that merchants set up their shopping carts, their kind of their online commerce solutions, it's not standardized. These systems aren't fully interoperable. You might have APIs, but your APIs don't work with your competitors' APIs for appropriate reasons. And that fragmentation in the industry is definitely a challenge, and there's no great way to bring that all together yet.
Thanks, Mike. Another question that we've come in is, will the concept of digital identity ease out the concept of payments? I can repeat that if you like. Will the concept of digital identity ease out the concept of payment?
Yeah, let me take a stab at this, right? I don't know.
Sure.
If you believe that they are 2 separate things, I could see where that question's coming out of, but payments and identity are so inextricably linked that, yes, if you get digital identity and it's ubiquitous across, it'll help payments, but at the same point, the movement of money is very important, and it's divided from how identity is managed, right? So they are connected, but moving money is different licenses in different regions. So that's never going to be, it's going to help for sure. Definitely going to help. But it's not going to be usurped or anything.
Thanks, Avin. Another question, as we move toward a future of autonomous transportation where perhaps we're not always going to be driving the car, how does that change the opportunity landscape for in-vehicle payments and what consumers are going to do and how they're going to engage their vehicles as a commerce platform and not just simply something they're manually driving? I don't know who wants to take that first.
That's a great question.
It's a great question. And I think I was looking at John and Mike smiling. And the reason is because, at least in my experience, everybody's talking about autonomous vehicles. Oh, this, you got the biggest thing is time.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing you're going to get is time back. And once again, if you look at anthropological, what do people do when they have time? They look at stuff and they want to buy. You want to look at things, learn, read, etc. Right? So if you just look at that simple, basic, what I would call liberal arts viewpoint, that's that's what I believe, this is Arvin's viewpoint. That's what people are going to do. They're going to sit down. I don't have to drive. Cool. Let me see what I can look at. Oh, I wanted to get this. I wanted to do this. I wanted to buy that. That's where it's just going to make it absolutely amazing, my opinion.
And we should also kind of, although we have card brands here present, and payments can include a wide variety of different approaches to how certain things are paid for. And so credit cards are one method. So I see the question around smart contracts. Some of this can be done with blockchain. Some of it can be done debit. Some of it will be done on apps and closed loop app ecosystems, such as PayPal or Venmo. So there's a whole continuum, and I think really in this SIG we're not going to exclude any of that. We really want to look at how do we actually kind of facilitate this for OEMs across a wide variety of forms of payment.
On a related note, John, where we're moving to shared mobility fleets where multiple people are using a vehicle, if the vehicle is an e-commerce platform, can any of you discuss what the cybersecurity protections are in place so that if, say, I rent a car in a given week and I'm using it as a platform for commerce, how my data is not going to end up getting inadvertently exposed to the next person who utilizes that vehicle, and how we should be thinking about that situation?
That's definitely it's definitely something to think about. I think tokenization is one way that we protect against that, so that the card numbers are hidden, they are secured. And then it also comes back a little bit to the authentication of the consumer. I think digital ID is a part of this. Who's using that car, and are the credentials in that vehicle associated with that consumer? And have they kind of validated with their bank that they are the consumer and those are their credentials, and the bank agrees with that? So there's definitely a little bit of work there. But I still think that the harder question is, how do we scale these programs with the merchant community, and with the, all payments is a two-sided market. You have buyers on one side and you have sellers on the other. And if you don't have both parties working together, you're not going to have a system. And so in the vehicle, we're trying to create a new version of this market. We need buyers on one side, which are the drivers. We need them to put their card in the car. We need them to feel confident that their card, when placed in the car, is secure. But we also need sellers on the other side. And right now, that I see as the biggest problem in the industry. It's not the technology, it's not the payments, it's not the the regional variation. This is all solvable stuff. The challenge is, how do you scale up so that I have every gas station accessible from my vehicle? Because as a consumer, I can go to any gas station I want. So if my vehicle isn't going to do that for me, there's a gap.
And another question is, which vertical, in your opinion, will be the first one to make a breakthrough when it comes to in-vehicle payments? Is it going to be tolling, parking, charging, food service? Which vertical do you see as the most of a running start on this?
That will be interesting, I think. I would say you always need to check on, where actually the benefits are for both the customer, but also needs to be profitable for all parties involved. So when we come to fueling, for instance, well, I think we have a very competitive market here, so I don't think there is a large share for everybody involved. And Mark will also say, well, also the card schemes want a share of it, the platform operators want a share of that, so that might be a bit difficult. However, I think for the customer, fueling will be probably the highest benefit they can get, the highest value they can get, because they can, Mike, as you described it, drive to every petrol station and simply drive through and get some petrol, maybe without even going out of the car. Yeah, it will be a very interesting question. I can't really not answer that. I think it will be also quite a competition between this products here.
And to that point, Jacob, are you seeing different verticals embracing this type of service more in one part of the world than another? Europe versus the US versus Asia? Just curious across borders.
Can't say. I think maybe Sherry has a better view on that. I guess there is definitely a difference between mega cities like New York and maybe the area of let's say somewhere in Eastern Europe. Yeah, maybe Sherry, can you put more light on what New Yorkers are doing in that regard?
Well, I was going to agree with what you had just said, that it kind of depends on where you are, because if you're in New York or even to some extent to Chicago, then certain categories drivers are going to be more interested in. That might be in food. In Chicago, parking might be important, where in New York it might not be important. So I think a lot of it depends on, you know, where the driver is. And in many of the small markets, you know, they don't even pay to park, or the concept of paying, reserving and paying, it just doesn't really matter as much as it would to somebody, you know, in an LA or in a Chicago or a Boston.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly pragmatic approach here and just look at the people, right? And if you would ask me, if I was a betting man and you said, hey, is it going to be gas? Is it going to be food? Which one, retail, which should it be? I'd say it'll be charging, right? And the reason is the people that buy those cars are and I'm making a huge characterization here, but I'd say they are slightly more technologically advanced, understand, use with their phones, etc. So I would say that's where you could see the first sort of foray, look at the charging and how they can make that payment experience smooth, simple, and easy. That I think will become the baseline for everything else, if I was a betting man.
And John, maybe we'll carry this over into the fireside chat, but kind of a follow-up question is, how will COVID change behaviors in terms of people touching or not touching things, and how does, inside or outside the vehicle? Maybe we can take that up in the next, the part 2.
Yeah, great. Well, actually, I think maybe we can ask Avin before he signs off real quick if how he's seeing COVID in the car and how all that interaction has been manifesting itself.
Well, I think, as I alluded to earlier, right, digital payments is the number one sort of thing that merchants are looking at. It's the same merchants that we would talk to before and say, hey, you should upgrade your system so you can take all the digital payments. And Mike will, I think, agree with me, when we did the Apple Pay and Samsung Pay and Google forecasting, our numbers were out like 3 or 4 years. Right now, the numbers for people using NFC, which is RFID tap to pay, has just skyrocketed. I've seen, merchants, the little store down my street was a little lady and she never wanted to. She's like, no, give me cash. Now she's like, we take Apple Pay, we take Google Pay, right? Like it's just absolutely changed the sort of communication, understanding that from a payments perspective. From a payments perspective, the digitization effort that the payments industry has been working on, I hate to say this, but has got a supercharge from COVID. And that's being reflected in the stock prices for, the companies or the networks, right? So.
That's great. Thank you, Avin. And thank you all on this panel. This was fantastic. Great discussion. I suspect we'll have more questions after the live event. So if you have those, please, we'll try to get those to you directly. But thank you all. And thank you, John, for moderating this.